Hello and welcome. I'm Matt Whitaker, the creator and director of the Truth and Conviction series. Today is October 27th, 2022, and it's a day that's been on my mind for a long, long time. This is the 80th anniversary of Helmuth Hübener's execution, and we are in Berlin, Germany, and I'm standing at the site where the execution took place. It is now a national memorial here in Germany. And it's been really, really important to our whole team to be here on this day to remember Helmuth. And the execution chamber is actually just right back here. There were a lot of really horrible things that happened in this chamber. But today as I stand here, there really is a feeling of reverence. This is the place where Helmuth gave his life, but not just Helmuth, hundreds of others who stood up against Hitler, took a stand for truth and for freedom. And we're here today to remember. We are sitting outside of the Plötzensee Memorial here in Berlin, Germany, here with Russ Kendall, John Foss. It is amazing to be here, isn't it? Yeah. This is, you guys both know that for a lot of years, in fact, I would send emails on important dates, and every year for I don't know how many years have I been sending these emails on October 27th saying 70 years since Helmuth's execution, 75 years, and kind of looking forward to this day thinking, man, it would be so great, so powerful if we could be there on the 80th anniversary of Helmuth's execution. So to be here, and you know what, to be here with you guys is truly meaningful for me. So this has been a week of really incredible experiences as we've been really kind of walking in the footsteps of Helmuth. We spent the last couple days up in Hamburg, where Helmuth and Karl and Rudy were born and raised, and where they were resistance fighters, were putting out these anti-Hitler, anti-Nazi leaflets on the streets of Hamburg, and operated from throughout 1941, and then it was on February 5th of 1942 when the Gestapo finally hunted down Helmuth and arrested him and tortured him, interrogated him for 5 days, and on February 10th is when they finally broke him, and he gave the names of his two friends, and Karl and Rudy were arrested on that day and brought in. And so this past few days we've been able to visit some of those places, the place where Helmuth was arrested, the place where they were brought and held, and at least for a while were interrogated and tortured. Yeah, right. And of course, very moving and meaningful for all of us. I thought maybe we would just take a minute and share an experience that we each had that was meaningful and worth sharing. I don't know, Russ, if you want to just...
Sure. Well, what's wonderful is of going to these actual places is it brings a reality to it. It grounds what, something that took place long ago and makes it real. To walk the places that he walked and be in those spaces. There's something very tangible about being there. A place that really had a pretty neat experience was in the Bieber House. That's the city hall, and that's where Helmuth worked. It's where he was also arrested. And we had the opportunity to chat with Sven Schuch, and he's a curator, art curator. He's also now kind of a budding Hubener historian. Yeah. And it was wonderful to have an exchange with him where he shared insights that really are going to affect how we look at the script and the telling of the story. Right. And in turn, we also shared, but did you know this? And it was this beautiful back and forth of just helping the story to continue to evolve and to grow and develop. And one thing that he brought up that I wanted to share, there's kind of an initiative now that's taken place here, and it revolves around Helmuth's name. And this just blew me away. Right here in bold, Mut. This means courage in German. Üben. This means practice. Practice courage.
It's amazing.
Blown away.
In the heart of his name,
In
it
the heart
says
of his
practice
name,
courage.
it's practice courage. And, you know, as I thought about that, you know, we often are saying, you know, Helmuth took a stand. We need to take a stand. That's not, you know, you just don't wake up every day and just say, I'm going to take a stand with courage. You know, that's something that takes intention. It takes practice.
It's practice.
It takes, you know, getting up with intention to say, I'm gonna do something better today. I'm gonna, you know, small acts of kindness, even reaching out to a friend, standing up for somebody at school. It's those little things that can make a huge difference. And I think about it, you know, Helmuth didn't start out as a full-blown Nazi resistance fighter.
That's a great point.
It started with a thought. Then it started with action. Was it a full-blown anti-Hitler leaflet or flyer? No, it was one keystroke. You know, the flyers
gave me
grew.
chills, dude.
It developed. You know, as he practiced, one step beget new, you know, more courage. And you know, so I love this.
Yeah.
You know,
Mut üben.
practice
that.
courage. So.
I love that you shared that. Yeah, that's great.
And being in the Bieber house, like you say, that's where he went every day for work.
Yeah.
For me, it was really interesting that, like on the bottom floors, we know, talking to Sven, that at the time, and even today, like there's a theater there, and there was at the time as well, and there was a cafe.
Yeah.
But up on the third floors, well, so people were down there enjoying themselves. Up on the second and third floor, Helmuth, we know, worked on the third floor. That's where the Nazis were processing their paperwork, and that's where Helmuth went in to work, and also where he was during the day working, and then at night, well, he was borrowing paper from there to do his resistance movement. So walking those steps, you know, and being in those places, and even walking into that room where they say, this is probably the area where Helmuth's office or, you know, his desk would have been right in this. He probably would have looked out this window right over the main train station, you know, just to be there and see those things. So
yeah, something you can see right from the train yard. You can look up and just imagine that window, imagine where he worked. You know, something that became real for me, this is my first time in Germany. You know, this is my first time in Berlin and Hamburg, and after living with this story, you know, for over a decade now, you know, with you guys for so long, it's really great to just see where he lived, like you said, in the footsteps of Helmuth. But something that became very real to me this time around was, you know, visiting the police station, you know, where he was first brought after he was arrested. What became real for me in this visit was not just imagining the events there, but really kind of that internal commitment, you know, that courage that he had been not only just practicing, but also just doing day in and day out. You know, after he was brought into this police station, I think about teenagers. I think about perhaps myself as a teenager. He probably could have given in at any moment, you know, to the Nazis, to these Gestapo agents. Ethan and I were talking about this actually. You know, he could have, within a half hour, Helmuth could have said, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, man. It was just me and my friends. We were goofing around. And we really didn't mean anything by it. I'm so sorry. But he didn't. He didn't break. He for 5 days, through, what is it? What do the documents say? Not torturing, but...
Well, they wouldn't use the word torture. They would say things like assiduous persuasion.
Yeah, for 5 days, he's enduring this, right? And he finally gave his friends names after 5 days, but can you just think about that? You know, this 16-year-old at the time, really, not giving in. And you know, talking, like I mentioned, Ethan and I talking about this, in this moment, Helmuth's becoming an adult. In this moment, the resistance movement is really galvanized because he doesn't back down. He doesn't back down from what he wrote and from what he did. And that, to me, just imagining that and feeling that here was really something, really an example to me, you know. And then just thinking about that as it came up to this, you know, months later as he came here and the last day of his life was spent here at this prison, visiting this prison, seeing it for myself for the first time. As you can imagine, it's hallowed ground. It's very sobering. But there's also something in Helmuth's life, it's also celebratory, you know, because of what he did. We can enjoy a lot of the freedoms that we enjoy now, where we can express ourselves freely without dire consequence like he faced.
Yeah, yeah, it was, for me, so at that police station, years ago when Carl told me about his arrest and being put into this paddy wagon, and he and Rudy driven to this police station and driving into this little courtyard, we stood there in that courtyard, and all of a sudden it just became so real to me. You guys know it actually became really overwhelming. It's still kind of hard to talk about, but when Carl talked about that paddy wagon pulling up and the Gestapo pulling him out of this wagon and taking them inside, and he said that he just glanced at one of the Gestapo agents who he said maybe was having a bad day, was the way Carl put it. But he said, "What are you looking at, you maggot?" And he said he pushed his face into this brick wall and broke his nose and bloodied his nose, and then got mad at him for getting their wall dirty. Well, standing there and seeing that brick wall and just thinking, this could be where that happened, right there. All of a sudden, it was just really overwhelming to me. And we could look down in this window and see this barred window. And I know that that was the room, 20 years ago when we were here with Carl, that we walked into with him. And I knew that's where our friends, that's where Helmuth and Carl and Rudy were held in those cells. So that for me was just a very, very, really overwhelming experience.
Yeah.
So, maybe we can just kind of take us through the next couple months, so of Helmuth's life, kind of those last, having been arrested at the Bieber house where you talked about, and brought to that police station where, you and I had kind of those powerful experiences, and then during the day going to the Gestapo headquarters and being interrogated, and over a period of a couple months until they finally, on August 11th, were taken on a train here to Berlin, and this is where at the Volksgerichtshof is the People's Court, the High Court of Germany, where Hitler appointed the judges, and here these three teenage boys. Carl, I remember him telling me, he said as they walked into that into the trial, into the courtroom, he said people were kind of amazed looking and seeing it. These kids walking in and standing trial, and of course where Helmuth really, his finest moment, I think, where he took on this Hitler appointed judge and pointed out, exposed him for the lies that he was telling there, really took all of the attention on himself, and so received the death sentence, saved the lives of his two friends, and then being transferred to another prison here in Berlin and waiting, being sentenced to death on August 11th, but not knowing, they didn't say you'll be executed on this date, they just said you're going to be executed. And so he's in a horrible prison, Plötzensee prison, and I've been in a section of those cells and seen those, and it was horrible. In fact, just a little detail that Carl told me about is that Helmuth, when for the last couple months of his life, in this little cell, they had him manacled, so a cuff on his wrist to a short chain that went to the wall, and so he could lie down on his cot with that, but if he tried to stand up, it was too short, he could never stand up fully. So for 2 months, he was in that kind of a situation. I mean, just can you imagine what that would have been like? But like you were...
Well, it makes me wonder, you're mentioning, he's sentenced to death in August, early August there. At the time, though, in his mind, was the legal system set up that, maybe he was thinking, can I get out of this? Like, it's not really going to happen?
Well, so that's a great question, because there were actually, you could apply for clemency, and there were multiple applications for clemency. We know that his mother did. We know that during this period, his stepfather actually adopted him to give him the last name of Hubener, which is what we know him by now. But his stepfather was a faithful member of the Nazi Party, was in the police, and so it was an attempt, we think, to give him, give him better odds of maybe overturning the death sentence and clemency.
That's a bold move.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, he's putting his neck on the line.
Yeah, it really is.
His reputation and career potentially.
Can't imagine what those discussions were like to take that step. Yeah, for him. But yeah, for that 2 months from August 11th to end of October, there were these clemency petitions that were going on. There was even a Gestapo agent who applied for clemency to try and overturn the death sentence, which is of course becoming a very powerful part of the series and the way we're going to present that. Another person who was putting at least his career on the line, if not his life, as a member of the Gestapo to ask for clemency to overturn this death sentence. I also find it really ironic, I guess, that of all these applications for clemency, there was a letter from the head of the Hitler Youth who said, yes, Helmuth Hübener was an exceptional member of the Hitler Youth, but what he did is just so terrible. No, we don't ask for clemency. In fact, we recommend against it. That was from the leader of the Hitler Youth. So all that was happening during that period. So Helmut really was in, I think, a state where he didn't know. There must have been some hope that maybe this would get overturned, maybe up to a certain point, and didn't know. But it wasn't until October 27th, during the afternoon, that he received. They brought him a document that said, you will be executed this evening, and it said that all of the applications for clemency have been overturned. We know that at least the clemency request from the Gestapo agent went all the way up to Hitler.
That's right.
And was denied by Hitler himself. And so Helmut found out about that on 80 years ago, about right now.
Right.
And so that's when he knew finally that this was his last day, these were his last hours. He was granted, they gave him permission to write 3 letters. And he did write 3 letters. He wrote a letter to his mother. He wrote a letter to his grandparents, with whom he was very close. He also wrote a 3rd letter to a woman named Marie Sommerfeld and to her family. The Sommerfelds were a family that went to church with Helmut, and he was very close to them. In fact, he and Carl and Rudy, almost every Sunday, would go over to their house. They had 3 daughters, 3 good-looking daughters, all teenagers, and they would go over there to the Sommerfelds all the time. But so that 3rd letter that Helmut wrote to Marie Sommerfeld is actually the only one that survived the war, because the letter that he wrote to his mother, the letter that he wrote to his grandparents, were destroyed the following year in the when Hamburg was almost annihilated in a bombing run in July of 43, and his mother was killed, his grandparents were killed, those letters were destroyed. The Sommerfelds survived, and that letter survived, and it's a precious document. We've got an English translation of it, and John, would you mind just reading what Helmut wrote just a couple hours before?
He writes, "Dear Sister Sommerfeld and family, when you receive this letter, I will be dead. But before my execution, I've been granted one wish, to write 3 letters to my loved ones. I want to thank you for the letter you sent me, dear Sister Sommerfeld, which they withheld from me. I also want to thank you for the many happy hours I was able to spend in the circle of your family. Please remember me kindly. I am very thankful to my Heavenly Father that this agonizing life is coming to an end this evening. I could not stand it any longer anyway. My Father in heaven knows that I have done nothing wrong. I am only sorry that in my last hour I have to break the word of wisdom. I know that God lives and He will be the proper judge of this matter. Until our happy reunion in the better world, I remain your friend and brother in the gospel, Helmut." Well, it's interesting to note here, he says in the last hour, I'll have to break the word of wisdom. And in his faith, they abstain from alcohol, and feels like that's the right thing to do. And it's just amazing to note that here in this one of his last letters, he's still staying true to what he feels is right.
Yeah.
You know?
They would have forced him to drink alcohol just before he's being executed to calm the nerves, and that's what he's referring to there.
Yeah. I mean, that's just a characteristic of Helmut, you know? Sticking to what he feels is right the whole time. That's like the story of his life.
Yeah.
I think it's important to note as well this plea almost to remember me. You know, similar thing he said to Rudy and Carl when they were last with him is remember.
Yeah. Which is the whole, I mean, that's why we're remember. That's really what this week and this day, trying to honor and respect Helmut's last wishes.
Yeah.
You know? And I also love in there that he shares a conviction of his faith too. I know that God lives. He'll be the proper judge of this matter.
Right.
It's just something so moving and so revealing when someone knows that they just have hours left to live. Boy, this is it. There's no pretense. You know, this is it. So
He seems so calm and collected as well.
yeah.
You know,
And there's no apology for what he's done, because he's like, I know I've done nothing wrong. I mean, just knowing what he did in Hamburg, distributing those leaflets around, and he's not like, I'm sorry I did that. He's just like, no. I mean, what I did was right. You know, it's pretty amazing.
So after he wrote those letters, we know that a physician came in and did which just seems so odd to me, but did a checkup, a physical examination on him. They took records of that, of course. You know, one of the things that throughout this whole process, and even the last day and these last hours, is that the Nazis, if nothing else, they kept good records, and almost minute by minute details of Helmut's last hours and last minutes of his life. So we know that after that checkup, everything was leading to later that evening when he would be taken into a chamber. This used to be a storage shed for the prison, and at a certain point they converted one of the rooms into an execution chamber where they had set up a guillotine. That sounds again so shocking. You know, when you hear guillotine, you think of the French Revolution. But for a period of time, especially in the late 30s and early 40s in Nazi Germany, they were officially executing resistance fighters and the condemned by guillotine. And so Helmut, just knew that his hours and his minutes were leading up to that. And speaking of those details, I took a minute just earlier today to talk us through some of the details that we do know about his last seconds of life. So, John, if we can just take it to that. It was on the evening of October 27th, a little after 8 p.m., so it would have been darker than this, that they led Helmut out of his cell and took him to a waiting area for those who were about to be executed. And then at about 8:12, they took him from that waiting area and brought him in through these doors. And this was exactly 8:13 p.m. when he came in through these doors. And we know that there was a table that was set up. There was a crucifix and 2 candles on the table. The director of executions would have been seated right behind it. And these curtains were closed until they would have opened them and led Helmut past that, and that's where the guillotine stood, was just right over there. And he was laid on the guillotine. We know from the records that from the time he entered the door to the time that he was led to the guillotine was 10 seconds. And from that point until the time that he was executed was another 8 seconds. 18 seconds. The fact that we know so many details about the very last moments of Helmut's life, the fact that we know that it was 18 seconds from the time that he entered the chamber to the time when he was executed, and just all those details they're disturbing in one sense, but also, you know what, I'm grateful actually. There's a part of me that's grateful to know We have a translation of the very, very precise records that they kept. And Russ, do you mind just reading a little bit of that? About
Sure.
these are the last seconds in detail of Helmuth Hübener's life.
The undersigned officials of the Reich's Attorney General's Office of the People's Court visited today the penal institution Plötzensee in Berlin for the purpose of executing the condemned prisoner Helmuth Hübener, who was legally sentenced to death on the 11th of August, 1942. The executioner from Berlin, Rutger, reported to the officers that he and his assistants were ready to commence with the execution. In the foreground stood a table covered with a black tablecloth, upon which were placed a crucifix and 2 burning candles. The back of the room was separated from the rest by a black curtain, which hid the guillotine from view. The undersigned officers took their place behind the table, and the executioner took his place with his 3 assistants in front of the closed curtain. The director of executions then ordered the condemned prisoner to be escorted into the room. At 8:13 p.m., the condemned man appeared with his hands shackled behind his back. 2 prison guards escorted him into the room, locking the door behind them. The director of executions then identified the condemned man as the one sentenced to death by the People's Court on 11th of August, 1942, and told the executioner to proceed. Immediately, the curtain was withdrawn, and the 3 executioner's assistants took hold of the condemned man, who was calm. The prisoner showed no resistance when he was placed before the guillotine. With his shirt removed, he was placed upon the apparatus, and the executioner removed the head from the body. He then reported the sentence was carried out. The procedure took 10 seconds from the time the condemned man entered the room until he was turned over to the executioner, and 8 seconds from when he was turned over to the executioner until the executioner reported that the sentence had been carried out.
Again, there's that little moment where it says the condemned was calm. And
Showed no resistance.
showed no resistance. Grateful to know that. You know, it's hard to say something after that, actually. We are well. I'll just say this. After hearing you read that, Russ, and just thinking about again why we're here, we know that in a few hours from right now, they're going to be, the German government is going to be holding a memorial event for Helmuth Hübener in honor of him, and we're blessed enough to be able to take part in that and attend that. Because you're seeing this before, we're recording this before it happens, but you're seeing it after it happens, we'll be able to actually, we've had permission to have a camera in there and filming the events that are happening during that commemoration. And so you'll be able to see those now. And in fact, let's just take a moment and see just a few moments and parts of this commemoration event.
Aber nicht aus der Wurzel.
our visit here has been sobering, of course. You know, we've seen so many places where Helmuth has walked, but it's also been celebratory to a certain extent, you know, to remember him and what he did. You know, it's been fun for us, it's been good for us as the creators of this series to go and visit, you know, these places important to Helmuth, but it's also been something on our minds about how we can share this story and why we're sharing this story with you. Why is any of this important for you? You know, probably many of you have never heard of Helmuth Hübener before our introduction, or maybe you did, but there are certain parts of Helmuth's life that we felt like it was important to capture, which is why we came here, this being one of them, you know, the main reason, this 80th anniversary, this commemoration of his life. And it's 80 years, you know, that's a long time, and still, you know, the legacy lives on. He only lived 16, so almost just over 17 years, right? Yeah. And it's a lasting legacy, and I just think that is just so profound, especially as I think about my own children. You know, I'm here visiting these sites, but I'm also sending messages home to my family, to my children, and I'm telling them stories about Helmuth, because I want for my children, I want them to understand the courage that Helmuth had, how he practiced it. You know, I want them to understand his commitment to what he felt was right. And I think that is such a powerful story. There's something that we all need in our lives. We need that constant reminder to be good, to be kind, to choose kindness, to stand up for truth. Because there's just a lot of negativity out there, right? And we just need more Helmuths out there, and to have this kind of story out there to share his life and his experience in this way, I think has been really important.
Yeah. For me, like you said, 80 years ago, and 80 years ago right now, you know, it was a very different place here, and you know, there were streets and plazas, and everything was named after Adolf Hitler or his henchmen, you know.
Right.
Today, nothing is named after Adolf Hitler or his henchmen, but we see that there are streets in Hamburg that are named after Helmuth Hübener, and there are schools that are named after Helmuth Hübener. We were at a school last night that they took a vote. They wanted a name that was meaningful. I think they were named after a street or something,
right.
And they said, we want a name that's meaningful for our students, and so they took a vote, and they voted for Helmuth Hübener. And so that's the name of their school. He's kind of like the basis of their curriculum. They center, you know, last night they had that beautiful memorial about him. I guess I say all this just to say, some may say he was a 16-year-old kid that operated for a while and then was executed. Did he make any difference? Yeah, he did. You know, and it's reverberating and echoing 80 years later.
Right.
What Helmuth did, you know, there weren't a lot of people that stood up. Right. But there were some, and Helmuth was one of those, and his friends who stood up and were willing to pay the ultimate price to do that. What they did became the soil that post-war Germany grew out of. That they were able to look back, the people in post-war Germany were able to look back and say, not all of us stood up, but some of us did. And so Helmuth and people like him prepared the soil, I think, for the building up and the rebuilding of what has become, I believe, one of the most peaceful nations in the history of the world. And so there is an impact. There's an impact for us and for our children. There's an impact to know that it made a difference.
You know, something that's coming to mind right now as we're here to commemorate and honor Helmuth's sacrifice 80 years ago. I don't share this often, but I feel that I should share a little thought about Carl as well. And I had the privilege of being at Carl's bedside, along with his wife, my wife, and Carl's brother-in-law when he passed away. And that day we went up to visit him. I had no idea he was near the end of his life. And you know, to be there when he passed to the other side was it's an experience I'll cherish forever. But I've also asked myself many times why. Why was I there? for this very sacred experience. And I have to think that it's to remember. It's to help Carl continue what he was doing. When Helmut told Rudy and Carl, remember me, Rudy and Carl did that for the rest of their lives. They continued sharing Helmut's story and what he did. And I feel that we've been entrusted with that. The friendship that we've had with Carl, he's entrusted us with his story, which in turn is Helmut's story. And so I'm just grateful, for that trust to be able to share something that really matters.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And by extension from that, by us being able to do this, wearing these shirts, we're inviting you with us to remember Helmut, like he said in that letter to the Sommerfelds, remember me kindly. You've become a part of this with us and become a part of Helmut's life by watching this and by joining us in these things. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for spending this time with us on really what has become a sacred day. It really has. Thank you for your patience with our emotions, which are obviously near the surface for this. But if you want to learn more about this story, you can visit angel.com/truth. And again, thank you.